for joining us today for ACCE's webinar on benchmarking best practices. I'm really thrilled you all can be here. If you have any questions through the webinar, please use the question panel and we'll address as soon as we can. Let me advance the slide here. Today we are joined by Cathi Hight, Senior Vice President, Growth Strategy and Investor Relations at the Greater Austin Chamber and also President of Hight Performance Group. And I am Sarah Melby, Director of Information and Research at ACCE. Again, we're thrilled to be here with you. Today's presentation will cover the top 5 reasons for why benchmarking matters, understanding how to use comparison data to make a difference at your chamber, discovering correlation factors in membership statistics, and learning what to measure, why, and how to use that data in a variety of reports to tell your chamber's story. A couple of housekeeping notes. Today's webinar will be recorded and placed on the Hero Webinars page. The handout will also be available, and that is under the information menu of ACCE's website. Attendees are in listen-only mode. To ask a question or submit a comment, use the question or chat feature in your GoToWebinar panel. And for questions after the webinar, please email hero@acce.org. So first, I'd like to introduce you all to Cathi Hight, who is Senior Vice President of Growth Strategy at Greater Austin Chamber in Texas and President of Hight Performance Group. Considered as the membership guru and developer of the Membership Retention Kit and a new approach to tiered membership, Cathi helps associations and chambers meet the expectations of their members. She provides strategies that help associations of all sizes manage change, deliver benefits that members value, leverage volunteer and staff resources efficiently, and effectively communicate the value of membership. So Cathi will launch right in with, why does benchmarking matter? Thank you so much, Cathi, for being here today.
That's great. All right, well, let's go ahead and get to the first reason, and I'm glad to have everyone here with us because, as you know, I love data, and I especially love what data can do for us. So the first reason is, like why would benchmarking matter? Why would you do it? Well, let's say that there's a change in leadership or staffing. I think at any time somebody comes into the organization that's in a leadership position, whether it's CEO or it could be a new VP of membership or new CFO, it's really great to understand what the patterns are and to be able to really look at your chamber and to be able to wonder, well, how does that compare, to other peers? Are we on a growth mode? Have we been the same for a while, or are we on a decline? And I think that, the data can kind of give you sort of that sense of where things are just for your own organization and what your own patterns might be. And let's take a look at the second reason. And so reason 2 would be, let's say that you're getting ready to do strategic planning for your chamber, and I always recommend this, that before you go into planning, you're supposed to do some environmental scanning. Hopefully you'll look at, maybe doing a membership survey before you do your planning, but it's also a good time to revisit your data. And what I find too is if you can give the data to your board of directors ahead of time, then they can look at the financials and what the revenue mix is and what the membership data is saying, so that they can come in the door having a real clear idea about what's been going on for the chamber and what the patterns are, and how they might leverage that as they go into that strategic planning retreat. And I think it kind of gives them sort of some insights in terms of where they might want to focus. With some chambers that I've worked with, they might actually do this at a board meeting, knowing that that strategic planning session is around the corner, because there's always a lot of questions, and rather than having to deal with all those questions at the retreat, sometimes it's nice to do this on a separate basis, sort of a pre-planning activity. You could also do it with staff, so if you don't do it with the board, again, looking at the numbers, looking at how you compare within the industry, and thinking about that as you look at your planning initiatives and how that data can sort of give you that forward perspective. So I always look at data as kind of being the windshield, it's the rearview mirror, because all this data is really just indicative of what's already taken place. So looking at that as you go into this windshield or planning session is always good. Look back first and then look forward. So that's another way that you might want to use the benchmarking data as part of your reasons for doing it. Reason number 3, and this comes up all the time. You'll see this on some social media sites or as people are talking. They want to know, are we normal? Is our retention rate normal? Well, what's normal? And so normal might make sense for you comparing yourself to other chambers that are the same size, but maybe not necessarily in looking at the industry at large. And so people always want to know how they're doing against the industry or against their peers. And so I think really understanding what normal is and being able to use the filters that the dynamic chamber benchmarking platform allows you to do. So I'll give you an example. You know, if you're kind of in a small community and you have 30,000 people, you don't want to be compared to a metro that has 5 million people, right? It's a totally different kind of chamber. You don't have the same number of businesses. You probably aren't going to have the same kind of retention rate, and just the way that your membership is made up or how you charge your dues aren't going to be the same. So if you're just curious about what that normal means, using the filters to really look at chambers who are much closer to what you look like seems to make the most sense, because then you can explain to your board or your staff or other decision makers if we are normal and be able to kind of tell them what it is that you're comparing your chamber to in terms of the others in the industry. Number 4, so maybe you're not in the habit of comparing yourself, looking at data on an annual basis, but I don't know why you wouldn't want to do that. But sometimes the only time that we really have to find out answers is because somebody raised a question, right? A board member asked. So this retention rate, how does that compare? Is it the same as it has been? Are we trending up or down? Or how do we compare to the town next door? Somebody's asked, and then you need to be that credible source to answer the question. So you might say, well, rather than just shoot from the hip, I think I'll go and run these numbers against the platform and really then be able to come back and explain it. And what's great about using data to answer other people's questions is people don't usually argue with the data, right? The data is sort of this reality check. Data's already in there, and if you're comparing yourself to 10 or 20 or 200 chambers, who's going to argue with that? So if someone does ask you a question and you really do need to have a quick answer to that, I think this is a great way to come back in and to look at the data, and so kind of use it as a resource when you need it. And then the 5th reason, which can happen as well, is let's say that you're looking at undertaking some type of change initiative. Maybe you want to change up your membership model. You're thinking about maybe increasing your dues, and you want to sort of benchmark that with some other chambers. Maybe you're trying to do a better job of recruiting, which at the Austin Chamber is something that we've been really working on over the last year, is looking at the data and really understanding not just our recruiting patterns and our membership base, but how does that affect us in terms of retention rates and what our average revenue is per member, and then sort of rethinking. So if data is history, looking at data as a way to plan a new initiative to say, okay, going forward, here's what we're going to do that's different, because the data is showing us our patterns, and if we want to change that outcome, we want to change our numbers, right, our financial performance, how do we leverage this data to really clearly communicate to us what we have been doing and what we want to do differently that really makes more sense? So looking at the data, I think you kind of get some ahas from there. And one thing I really want to talk about in this webinar is sometimes it's really more than just one data metric. Sometimes you have to look at several data metrics and realize that the pattern is really the combination of these metrics. And so looking at that, that's going to give me a better idea of what I need to change, because this one particular metric doesn't tell me what to do, because I don't really understand how that retention rate perhaps is affecting my financial performance, or where my growth might be, or my market share or any of that. So you can't just take one data set by itself. And so when you think about some things that you might want to change, like first-year retention, which we've always struggled with, we always have the worst retention with first-year members. For the Austin Chamber, for instance, one of our initiatives for 2017 is a strategic recruiting plan. And that's all based on the data that we've looked at and said, okay, we're going to recruit a little bit differently. We've looked at what our metro peers are doing. We see where our Achilles heels are, and now we're going to put together a new plan that's hopefully going to drive these numbers that may not show up for a year, maybe 18 months, but we already have the baseline. So now we can come back to this and see whether or not it's actually making the change that we want it to. All right, so let's move on. And so let's think about data. Now, like I said, now I know everybody's not really interested in data. Like, I love data, and Sarah loves data, and there are a number of us that do. And I love data because, to me, data is membership intelligence. It really is. Amazon uses their business intelligence. Every time you buy something from Amazon, for instance, they know a little bit more about you, right? And that allows them to target you a little bit differently and maybe predict what you might be interested in. Well, it's all based on data. So the data are things that have already happened. So when I look at member intelligence, it's about information, it's about having some type of knowledge. It's really sort of looking at trends, right? And so I look at data as giving me some insights. Now, sometimes it confirms what I already knew, right? I kind of had this gut feeling. I had a sense that things were going in this direction, and the data tells me if I'm right. But if my data isn't good, right, the garbage in, garbage out sort of syndrome, if your data is not clean, I've had a lot of people who have run reports, and then they'll go, oh my gosh, 50% of the date joined is missing. Ah, okay, well, now you know. So then you have to figure out how you're going to get that data back in, because if we're going to look at longevity and how it relates to retention, then obviously date joined would be an important field to have filled out. So the data, is sort of that cornerstone that really allows you to be able to make those kinds of insights and down the road thinking, but it really, really starts with the data. And what I discover, and why this can really suck you in a good way, is the more that you discover, the more you learn, the more you want to know. You go, well, that's interesting. I wonder, well, like, what about this? If I looked at this, what does that tell me? And that curiosity factor, the wanting to peel the onion, I think is great, because that curiosity is going to show you so much more that you knew or didn't know about your chamber, and it's definitely going to give you some insights that you can use. So let's take a look at this intelligence pyramid. And I've taught using data as a course for Institute of Organization Management for the U.S. Chamber, and a lot of times this is a core class. People come in and they say, well, I'm not really responsible for the data, or I do government affairs, or I do events, or whatever it is, and I'm not really the database person. But I think what everybody has to realize is that data is so important for everybody in your organization, and I hope that you communicate that to everyone, because the data is the engine. It's what drives everything else. So think about data as being those individual fields: date joined, what their dues are, how many employees they have, what kind of business are they, right? All of this information is data. And I'm not saying you have to fill out every single field, but I think you should look at the different data sets and ask yourself, what's most important to know? Why would we need that? How would we use that? What's that connected to? And make sure that those data fields are indeed filled in. Because once you've got data in there, you have information or reports, right? The ability for you to be able to pull a retention report or to pull something to really look at your membership base. Those charts, that report that you would get could not happen if the data wasn't there. And then knowledge. Knowledge is super important. So even in the dynamic benchmarking platform, you're able to see trends year over year. Well, you don't get those patterns. You don't get that trending up, trending down, are we flat? You don't get the knowledge, which comes from data over time and being able to see change. Because remember I said every change initiative that you make is going to have an outcome on the data. The data is going to show you what the decision did. And so if you don't have the trending, you don't have that knowledge, then you're not going to be able to have any intelligent kinds of reports that really tell you, hey, it's working, or no, that really didn't do it. We may have to try something different. And then this concept of business member intelligence, think about it being Amazon, to say, if I know enough, would I be willing to bet that things will go this way if I make this change? Could I target this member with this opportunity because I know that much about them? I know what they purchased in the past, so I think that they'll be interested in this. You know, you can't have that. You can't have that targeted, future-oriented thinking for planning if you don't have the data, because the data drives everything. So I hope that you sort of understand that, relate to that, and then what we're going to be talking about going forward here is, wow, what kind of member intelligence did 3 case studies of chambers have that actually propelled them to make some pretty interesting changes and choices. So let's move ahead, Sarah, and we'll talk about some questions, because this is going to come up. People will say, well, do the benchmarking. And I'm sure that ACCE has bugged you about putting your data in for 2016. And even for this chamber who didn't participate in 2014, I'm inclined to go in and put in the previous years. Let's do 2015, 2014, because I want to see that trending. And yeah, there are a lot of questions. And so sometimes people will say, I don't know, why should we do this? Why should we put all this data in it? What is it that we're going to get? Well, imagine if you can think about the way that you can answer these questions, right? Could the data help you improve your first-year retention strategy? Yes, it can. And so there's going to be a trigger here somewhere where someone's going to say, that's exactly what we want to do, and maybe it's not all of them. If you really want to understand the retention of dues or number of accounts, so for instance, I've worked with a particular chamber who found that just by doing some really cool recruiting initiatives, 2 years later they have 200 fewer members, but their revenue is up. So, understanding that and how the data can influence that and help you make some choices, because sometimes we get too caught up in looking at number of members rather than the quality of the members and looking at the retention rate. So, maybe the benchmarking data could actually help you to figure out this whole retention question, which I think it does. With market penetration, well, who are you trying to go after? Most chambers, unless you're a real small chamber, you probably don't have a really a lot of market penetration, but like for us in the metro, we only have 8% of all of Austin businesses. So do we go after all businesses? If we're going to increase, let's say 10%, where it makes the most sense for our focus to be? And so how you go about that and how you want to uptick that market penetration is probably linked to the recruiting and the retention data, so you can help figure out that puzzle as well. And that leads you to that member recruiting plan. Yes, if you look at who you've been recruiting in the past and what your outcomes might be, maybe you can recruit differently because you're looking for a substantially different outcome. And I'll tell you, for the Austin Chamber, it's exactly what we're doing, because our first-year retention sucks. Absolutely sucks when we compare to other metros. So me coming in as a membership guru, what do? I look at the data and I'm like, oh, I get it. This is what we're doing. Here's what we need to do to change. And I do think that those numbers will look very different in 2017, which then leads to financial performance, right? So if you want more money, you're trying to increase your revenue or trying to figure out where you might diversify your revenue, then the benchmarking is going to help you get there. So, all right, very cool. I hope you're excited, because I get real excited because I just think that there's so many really great things. And when I have seen chambers really use the ACCE dynamic benchmarking platform and help them really look at what the data is telling them, you can just see it in the room. You see the board members and you see the staff, and it might be kind of scary because data sometimes tells us, oh, gee, look what we've done. We've created these numbers, but at the same time, it's a great way to say, oh, but it's so good that we know this, because now we can do some really, really cool things. So we're going to dig a little bit deeper, and our 3 case studies, because I know we have a wide variety of people who are in the chamber industry who are on this call, because small chambers might say, well, should I really participate? Is it going to make that much of a difference? Versus I could see if I was a bigger chamber, and the answer is no. Yes, you should do this, because even a small chamber, being compared to other small chambers, are certainly going to be able to benefit from this. Not only do you learn from your own data and your own trending, but in order to have some really great benchmarking, enough chambers have to participate where you could really have this benchmarking opportunity to see what other chambers are doing. So we are going to look at a small chamber and what some of the metrics were that we were looking at, and then I'll tell you a little bit about the direction that they decided to go, and then a mid-sized chamber, and then a metro chamber. So benchmarking to me is really about telling a story. And the way that you get the story, as I mentioned earlier, is you really need to look at all the data. And the comparison filters that are in the dynamic chamber benchmarking really allow you to filter down. Although one of the things that, I think we'll come back to this, Sarah, when we would kind of talk about the filters and maybe be able to get a little snippet of what I'm talking about with the filters. I don't want to convolute that because it can be a little confusing, but for now, I just want you to realize that the filters can allow you, to choose the population size, number of staff, your revenue, how many members you have, lots of different things. So there are multiple filters that you can use so that you're not benchmarking yourself against the whole world, but you're applying filters so that you can really compare yourself to chambers who are more like you. Okay, so let's get into the small chamber. So this was a chamber that was in a suburb of a metro city, but definitely a smaller community. And they decided that they were really going to think about revenue. That wasn't their original premise. This was just kind of coming into a strategic planning session. We said, well, let's take a look at the data. Let's compare ourselves to other chambers that are similar size. And like most chambers, they didn't have a lot of people. I think they had 3 staff. Their revenue was not really high, and their dues revenue, and so they were really focused on, well, how do we increase our revenue? But first, I want to look at the slides, and I want you to be the consultant. I want you to look at the slides, and these are just, of course, a handful of the slides that they got to look at, right? So when they looked at themselves, we'll take a look at the top left. This chamber had 650 members. Now for a small chamber, that's a lot. That's a lot of members. I mean, if you look, 50 percentile, other chambers with similar population sizes, had about 340. And even the majority of them, the 75th percentile, was at 470. So this chamber was doing a really bang-up job on getting a ton of members, which is great. Okay, now when you take a look at their let's go to the bottom left. We look at the total chamber dues. Okay, they're in the 75th percentile. That's not too bad. So their dues were probably on par with what other chambers were charging. They just had a lot of members. And then when you looked at their non-dues revenue, over on the right-hand side, the bottom right, you could see that, okay, they were a little bit off to the right of the middle, but certainly some of these other smaller chambers with fewer members were obviously doing a lot better in their total non-dues revenue, right? So it wasn't really the dues that was hurting them too much, but it seemed like something was really going on with the revenue. So then we look at the top right and we look at the revenue breakdown. And one thing they noticed was on the left, their chamber obviously, yes, dependent on events as well and membership, but then when they looked at the pie, right, on the right-hand side of all these other chambers, and they were saying, oh, well, their revenue seems like it's a lot more diversified. Like, we're over here killing ourselves, doing the events, and we've got all these members, and of course, other slides that you could also look at is, how many, they have 3 staff trying to handle 650 members. I mean, that's a ton. That's a lot. And saying, maybe we're working too hard here, right? So let's take a look at the next set of slides. So this was an interesting group of slides, and I like putting them together. I know when ACCE allows you to download your report, and every metric is on a separate slide, but picking and choosing the ones that you think kind of go together is an interesting exercise, because it's kind of like building a puzzle and saying, let's take a look at this. All right, so we look at the membership revenue per chamber member over on the left-hand side, and this was really telling, saying, okay, well, our average membership revenue, so that's total revenue divided by number of members, 473, but wow, look at these other smaller chambers doing 800, and is that 62, 82, but still, it's not quite double, but pretty darn close. They're going, well, how could that be, that their number of, so they have fewer members who are doing double the revenue per member. Interesting. They looked at the dues investment, and there was some discrepancy. They're saying, okay, what's going on here? So does that mean, because these guys have fewer members, so obviously their average per dues is higher than ours. So maybe quantity really isn't the answer, right? It's not how many members you have, it's maybe fewer members. Now this particular small chamber was not on a tiered model, and I can't remember if a lot of their counterparts were, but something's driving the fact that we have fewer members over here with our peers, but they're getting more from those members than we are. What's that about? They looked at retention, and for a small chamber, the retention, most metro chambers would love to have about 82%, but a small chamber where the average is 88, 89, not so good. Well, maybe when you have that many members, it's really hard to have relationships with them and to really manage that retention process, because like I said, you got 3 staff trying to manage 650. So quantity isn't necessarily panning out too well. And they looked at their first-year retention, who they have no time to deal with, not too good, right? So while they have some counterpart chambers who are doing 91, I think more realistically, I think kind of hitting this middle ground around 70% would be a really good number. So their numbers were really, really low. So looking at that as a prelude to that strategic planning session spurred a lot of great conversation with the board members, saying, we got to look at revenue. We should not be chasing recruiting. Maybe we really need to think about who we have. Do we need to have so many? Can we serve all of them? What are other ways to develop, better relationships, diversify our revenue sources, and think about how we can serve our members in a different way, because going after everybody in town has not really worked so well for this chamber. And I think their total revenue was just over $250,000, which compared to their counterparts was pretty low. And so without having that much more money, they couldn't hire anybody else. So again, putting some slides together and really talking about what's the story here, what is this data telling us, can be really a great experience for the board and the staff. So let's move on to the mid-sized chamber. And this mid-sized chamber, I remember we did a couple of different things. We looked at chambers who were of similar size. We also looked at university towns, because they were a university town, and the data was a little bit different. So that's a nice thing about the dynamic benchmarking platform, is that it really allows you, if you are a university town, to be able to look at other towns that do have a big university there as well. But mid-size in terms of population, I think these guys probably had about 1,100 members. So what they end up doing as a result of going through the benchmarking process, this was not, this was part of a strategic planning effort also, but this chamber focused a whole lot around looking at the organization for a number of reasons. We did some one-on-one interviews with all the staff. They have a lot of young staff, and turnover was pretty high, and the young staff were saying, well, we leave because there really isn't that much opportunity here at the chamber, and we don't get paid that well. And so listening to that as a prelude and then looking at the data and then into the planning session was pretty telling. So this chamber decided, because they were actually doing pretty well on a number of things, retention, those kinds of things. So for them, their focus became much more internal, looking at the staffing size, saying, okay, we have 8.5 people. They're not a primary economic development organization, so about on par with other people. So it's not like we should really necessarily hire more people, but maybe we need to kind of look at something different. So they looked at finance and staffing. And you can see that over on the right-hand side on the top left, their personnel expense was lower than their peers. Now, some people might look at that and say, "Oh, that's pretty good, right?" Maybe because we're in a smaller town, you know, it doesn't cost as much. We can keep our costs down, or it just might be that maybe you're not paying your people pretty, you know, well enough or compared to your other peers. And then when we looked at the staffing turnover and said, oh, okay, so guess what? Our costs are low, but guess what? A third of our staff walk out the door every year. And if you look at that on a trending basis, you're going to say, I wonder if there's a correlation there, right? And then over on the left-hand side, looking at expense per chamber member, well, if your expenses are low, then of course your average expense per member is going to be low. But for us, the internal dialogue was really about how do we keep these millennials? What are some ways that we could restructure the organization? Because it was very flat. It was 8 people or 7 people reporting to the president. And I think what we just decided, what made more sense, is maybe we needed kind of a middle tier where we could elevate some of these millennials to other positions and give them kind of a career path and pay them a little bit more and really sort of reduce that staffing turnover. They did a bang-up job on events. They did great on revenue. They did great on retention. But for them, it was just this internal revolving door of their staff was really what they were more concerned about, and that's where they focused on with the benchmarking data. Okay. Let's go on to the Metro Chamber. This was a chamber that, you know, very proud, 5-star, did a lot of things right. I mean, obviously, if you've got 5-star accreditation from the U.S. Chamber, you are, you know, not a bad chamber at all. You've got a lot of good things in place. They had 5-star status for quite a while. And I think for them, when they went through this benchmarking process with their other Metro peers, it made them feel proud because they really did see a lot of good things like, look at us. Wow, we're really rocking it, right? And that was wonderful. But they also noticed a couple of areas that they wanted to focus on to get better. So even if you're doing really well and you're 5-star, doesn't mean that there isn't some room for improvement. So they were looking at average revenue per member and saying, well, that's interesting. We're firing on a lot of cylinders, but interesting how, you know, some of these other Metro chambers are doing a little bit better for, you know, than us on this average revenue. Now, they actually did have a tiered model, but they were looking at making it a little bit better and maybe looking at the tiers and, you know, do they need to add a level? So those kinds of questions. So again, when you look at them and you look at their membership statistics, how many members they have, yeah, they're right up there, 75th percentile with 1,823 members. Yeah, looks pretty good. Now, and then when you look at their number of new member accounts and their canceled members, you know, not as high as the other ones. So that means that their retention numbers were a little bit better than what their peers were. So again, this slide made them happy and saying, wow, that looks pretty good. So now we'll go over to the next set of slides. And the next set of slides is, again, where we kind of put together a few slides that sort of became kind of part of our conversation. So looking at the total revenue per chamber member on the top left, and they said, okay, we're at $2,007, right? So our total revenue divided by our number of members. But hey, you know, these guys are 5 stars, so they want to be the best. And they're looking at 75th percentile, and they're going, wow. So those other chambers have an average that's higher than ours. Now, that's an average. So $400 average per member. Remember, they have 1,800 members. That's pretty significant. They looked at the dues investment, and they were saying, Oh, wow, that's interesting. You know, when we compare ourselves to our peers, our average dues investment is coming in here at $363, and we have our peers, and they're coming in again, you know, almost double. And they're saying, huh, that's interesting. They have the same number of members as us, but they've got members who are investing higher. Huh, maybe we need to take a look at that. Look at their finance, their revenue breakdown, and where their revenue. And this chamber was a little bit different because they are the primary economic development organization for their community, and they do get dollars from the city. So financially, they're not set up exactly the same way as these other chambers. So we look at some of these other chambers who are doing some other kinds of things. So they're thinking, okay, is that revenue coming from other sources? Are there things that we need to be looking at, like a PAC or doing some other things? But just, you know, kind of doing more apples to apples with those chambers. They looked at their total annual chamber revenue there on the right-hand side, and they were saying, huh, man, we're not even in the middle. You know, we got a little bit of ways to go, but our counterparts who are doing much better than us, that additional revenue, you know, guess what? More money for your mission, right? So just start to make them think. Now, once you have this, then you have to have a conversation around, so what do we do? Are we looking at raising our dues? You know, one of the conversation pieces they had was that they did have a base rate that was $395, and the other metro chambers didn't have that base rate. They were starting like at 500, and so they said, should we get rid of the base rate? Should we introduce maybe a higher tier, you know, or a tier that's kind of second from the top, and maybe, you know, try to see if we can influence more people to go there. What kind of benefits will we offer? So again, it spurs a lot of conversation around how do we change this if we want to be where our peers are, and that's a choice for you. You might look at this and say, this is us, and we're doing pretty well, and we're totally happy with where we are. These guys are a little more competitive and said, no, we want to be in the 75th percentile. So these are some things that we really need to do. Okay, let's move on. And once you've got all this data, right, there's so many things you can do with it. Build a retention plan, absolutely, but based on what, right? Where do you want to focus? Do you want to focus on those first-year members? One of the interesting things that I did when I looked at the benchmarking analysis with the Austin Chamber and 9 other metro peers, it was really interesting to see that, you know, we had a lot more really small businesses than those metro chambers did, 53% compared to the average of 36. And so we thought, okay, well, for us, we need to start recruiting for retention, so that a concept around strategic recruiting came up. We saw that, you know, obviously our first-year members were really, that retention rate was so low that in our retention plan, we really needed to focus on first and second-year members, doing a better job of onboarding, and really looking at what kind of outreach, how do we measure engagement, how do we really look at risk and start to focus on this. So, you know, that's the stuff that you're not going to get from the benchmarking platform. What you're going to get is the data. And the data is telling you a story, but the story is really about you, right? And what we did is we looked at who those 9 chambers were, and we interview them, talk to them to find out, well, what are they doing so that they get better retention numbers than we do? What are they doing because their average revenue or average dues is higher than ours? Because there's a story there too behind the data. So you've got your story, and then it's really understanding what's driving the performance of those other chambers that seem to be doing better than you. It can help you make decisions around your membership dues, your plans. Certainly, as I pointed out, using this as a driver going into your strategic planning session, really understanding the landscape, your history, and where you compare before you start deciding what it is you want to focus on. The organizational review, so maybe it's nothing to do with your strategic plan, but it's really just a look at yourself and how you operate. Maybe with all the millennials coming in the chamber industry, we do want to do a better job of keeping them. The annual plans, the annual reports, things that we can use, things that we're really proud of that we want to share, just again kind of looking at ourselves. And here at our chamber we really looked at, if we're really going to change retention, we need to do recruiting better, we need to do onboarding better, we need to really look at the mix of our programs, and we needed to really evolve to be much more of a customer-centric culture. Those were the 4 things that we were going to do to really change our outcomes. Dashboard reports, start to kind of give you that snapshot in time. And once we set our goals for what we wanted to do around recruiting for retention and what our membership base was, we now capture a dashboard of what our membership looks like every quarter, and we look at the last 2 or 3 quarters, and it's interesting to see how it's moving. So you don't have to wait until a year goes by before you know if something's working. You can actually kind of start to look at things quarterly and then come back and look at the annual data again to get that overall picture, but there's lots of things you can do internally to kind of keep score for yourself. All right, let's continue on. Other things we didn't really touch on, but that you can certainly look at. I've done benchmarking with some chambers who wanted to focus just on board and governance analysis. Size of our board, because we've heard some trending about board size shrinking. So they said, well, let's take a look and compare ourselves to other board members, a number of board members, and how often they meet. And then that kind of got us into interviews with talking about, well, how do you recruit people to be on your board? And what percentage of your board members are engaged? And, so if you had 80% engagement of your board members, what are you doing at your meetings, or what are you doing with your onboarding process that makes them so engaged? So again, looking at the data and then saying, well, that's interesting. They only meet every other year, or they only meet quarterly. Oh my God, we have 70 board members. They have 35. Well, that's interesting. So again, the comparisons is really just the beginning of wanting to kind of dive a little deeper. But again, looking at your financials, where your money comes from, where that concentration is, your stats we talked about, looking at how many employees you have, and you can also go into the operations survey, look at salary comparisons, and really then focus on strengths and weaknesses, and then using that data to really understand yourself and ask yourself how you can be better. All right, we'll continue. More discussion. So, good questions for you, right, is to think about what are some things, some decisions or things that you could really take away if you actually engaged in this whole benchmarking process. And then think about how you would leverage the data into your own planning. I want you to think about that. How do the results really help you to make decisions? It's sort of your checkup, if you will, look under the hood, and that's really then going to help you. And I love the fact that ACCE has come up with not just the trends report, but this KPI report card. You get everything on one page now, not a whole bunch of 36 slides, but you can get this one page that shows the average, of your peers all on one page. What a great tool to be able to use that in a board packet or at your staff retreat, and to really begin to take a look at that, and to be able to look at the trending analysis over the last 3 years. And you might be curious enough to want to go back in and put that data in for your own chamber so that you can actually have that trending analysis for your own chamber, and then look at the trending analysis of other chambers. I found that really interesting. One of the things I noticed, for instance, in ACCE puts out the annual report, and they sort of look at, the results, let's say, of 2015, and I'm sure 2016 the report would be coming out too. And what I noticed over the years is how retention rates were actually getting better for first-year members, getting better overall, where we were kind of really in this decline right after the recession of with the 2008. You saw this decline, and then you started to see an uptick. Well, if your chamber didn't have the uptick, then you start to think, well, how come those guys recovered and we didn't, right? So the trending can really tell you a whole lot. Okay, moving on. Call to action. I want you to do it. And maybe part of that is selfish, I think, for me and for my chamber and other chambers that I serve. Why? Because if everybody does it, there's more data for us to benchmark against and to see it. It's no fun if just a handful of people do it. It's a lot more interesting and more compelling when a lot of people do it. Do it for you, but do it for the industry as well. And if there's a change that you could make, like if you did the data analysis and did your own benchmarking, and you said, okay, based on that, I know exactly what changes we want to make. Wouldn't it be great to come to convention looking for best practices to do just that, right? So leverage the data from last year and the year before. Think about what it is that you want to focus on. That's going to tell you who you want to talk to. What's even more interesting is if you know who your peers are, you should look for them and talk to them. And it's not just the sessions you go to, but it's the conversations you have between sessions, you know, or when you're networking or just sitting at the bar, that you can actually talk to some of your peers about, hey, I want to learn more about that. And what's great about this being a dynamic tool, what does that mean? It means that, you know, I put my data in, let's say in January, and a bunch of other people put their data in June. Well, now the data set's changed, right? So I can actually come back in and run my reports again, and it's all based on the same year, but now I've got more people who have taken it, and now the data starts to change in terms of where my position is now that more people have weighed in with where they are as well. Okay, all right, Sarah, so now you can talk a little bit about the tool itself and what people can do and how they can use it.
Oh, wonderful, Cathi. I don't know about you all, but I just feel like I was thoroughly steeped in amazing benchmarking knowledge. So, Cathi, thank you so much. I'll cover a little bit more about dynamic chamber benchmarking and just a few easy steps to get started. Cathi mentioned several times about the different reports you can download through dynamic chamber benchmarking. So I'm going to talk about that as well as some of the different filters and how to customize slides. So those really great slides that Cathi was showing in the case studies, all of those slides you can download directly from Dynamic Chamber Benchmarking as part of the Chamber Operations Report. And that's the PowerPoint slide deck, and I'll pull that up here in a second. And then, as Cathi also mentioned, this new Chamber Report Card, which has the key performance indicators. I gave a webinar in December on that KPI report card and how to access that. I'm happy to answer any questions about getting that for your chamber as well. But that is actually downloaded from the operations survey section. And then the other part that Cathi mentioned is fiscal year 2015 versus fiscal year 2016. So just a quick note about that. We did open up fiscal year 2016 surveys about a month ago, and so we're inviting all chamber members to participate in those fiscal year 2016 surveys. There are a couple of easy tips on this slide here, so you can access the benchmarking survey platform with your ACCE login, and I'll head over there in a second. Then you can review what your chamber has participated in. So there are three sections: chamber profile, operations survey, and then the salary survey. And Cathi mentioned the great resources you can find in the salary survey section to help with personnel management and reviewing salaries and so forth. Salary survey section is open to CEOs or their delegates, staff delegates. So in Dynamic Chamber Benchmarking, if you did participate in the 2015 surveys, it's really easy to use a tool called Copy Prior Year Data. It's available on each data entry page. So you copy 2015 answers over into 2016, then you just edit and save. And remember that Dynamic Chamber Benchmarking is a live platform, so any changes you make are instant, but that's great because if you have changes, edits, and so forth, you can just log in anytime. Same thing with accessing the reports. You can download those anytime, 24/7, as long as you have 50% or more completed for the fiscal year of which you're obtaining reports for. And if you did not participate in fiscal year 2015, it's still okay. It's a good place to start because, again, you can download the 2015 reports that Cathi was talking about as soon as you have 50% or more completed, and then use that copy prior year data tool, and then get 2015 answers into 2016, and then very, very easy to edit. So getting your fiscal year numbers in now will help us reach critical mass, so that we can open up all the fiscal year 2016 reports and comparisons earlier, hopefully anticipated early spring. Now, some of you have asked HERO or Ask ACCE if there's a deadline. There's no longer a deadline with dynamic chamber benchmarking when we launched this survey system in 2014. However, there is a deadline if you're planning to apply for Chamber of the Year, and we have information about that Chamber of the Year award on our website, and we are also giving a webinar tomorrow on the steps to apply for the Chamber of the Year award. And again, what reports are available include fiscal years 2012 through 2015 in dynamic chamber benchmarking. Fiscal year 2016 will be coming out this spring. And as Cathi also mentioned, ACCE does produce an annual report, and we do that every early spring. So look for that publication to come from us March, April, more than likely in April. And that's traditional. We've always produced an annual report based on the operations survey data. So as Cathi mentioned, dynamic chamber benchmarking is truly dynamic. So you can always enter your data in, but we do greatly appreciate your participation as early as possible to help us produce this publication that will be coming out in the spring. So I'm going to actually pop over to the platform, and I want to make sure we have time to get to your questions as well. So in dynamic chamber benchmarking, as we were talking about before, there are 3 sections. All of you can participate in chamber profile, and then operations survey, and then the salary survey section is open to CEOs. Once you have the sections completed, there's actually a progress report that you can see how much your chamber has participated over the years. And again, as Cathi mentioned, you can always go back and backfill your data for previous years, and that helps with the trend reports. So some of you may know that you can download what's called the trend report, Chamber Trends, that looks at your data from 2012 through 2015. As soon as the 2016 reports are released, that trend report will include also 2016. So the big question we always get with the HERO team is, how do I get those reports? So first of all, we always recommend looking at your breadcrumb trail at the top. So you'll see the main reports that Cathi was talking about all live under the operations survey section under reports and charts. When you first log into the system, it does default to fiscal year 2016 because that is the year we're hoping you will participate in as far as most recently. However, you can just use this year drop-down and go back and select any year to either input your data or download reports. So we just select for the fiscal year 2015, since these are the reports that are currently available, as well as back to 2012. You can download any of these reports again under the Operations Survey Reports and Charts. And when you're working with reports, as Cathi was mentioning, there are these powerful filters you can apply. And this is so you can drive down, drill down, and get results that are most like chambers like you. So really, truly peer comparisons.
Yeah, can I just interject in there real quick, Sarah? One of the things I've always told people, if you're going to be doing this, don't filter yourself out of the mix. In other words, if you pick too many filters, you're not going to have that many peers, right? So for me, I think that the ones that are important, you know, if you look at your organization function, you know, like if you're a chamber that is also in economic development or a CVB, I think that's important because I think the revenue sources are totally different. But when you look at your population or service area, I think that's a good one to use. You could, you know, pick geographic region if you want. I usually don't. And I'm trying to think what else I might actually pick. Probably not that many. Just, you know, for me, I err on having few filters because that's when you're going to see the real outliers. You're going to see the chambers, like I said, you know, yeah, they're like you, your population size, but I would not fill in revenue, for instance, and I wouldn't fill in membership dues revenue or number of members because to me, too many filters and next thing you know, you've got 3 peers, you know, but if you leave it open, so you have your function, you have the population area you serve, maybe one more at the very, very most, and then really look at that report because you can always come back in here and change the filters. But I like to see the continuum because then that tells me, okay, I really am in the middle, but look at how many people are beyond me, but they're serving the same size of a population, but doing much, much better than me. So don't over filter, you know, like just really think about what's super important to you, but maybe you pick 2, you know, 3 at the most, but don't necessarily have to pick a filter for every single one of these things. So I think that's important to know because then you get disappointed when you find that you don't really have that many peers. You know, there's not that many people who are there just like you, right?
Really good point, Kathy. Thanks so much for mentioning that. And we do have a live chat inside Dynamic Chamber Benchmarking that's staffed by the HERO team. And so if you have a question about filters and which one we would recommend you use based on your case, please feel free to use this chat and we can help work with you. Occasionally you will see, just like Kathy said, if you go too narrow, the system will tell you. It will say there are not enough chambers to compare to. So when you get that, it's kind of like gamifying. Play a game with this and adjust your filters to work for your subset, your comparison group. There's also a really powerful peer cluster option, and if you're in a ACCE community peer group like hometown chambers or emerging cities or metro or majors, you can just click into this peer cluster and that group is already preloaded for you. And so if you're not sure about that, whether you're in a peer group, use our chat. We're happy to help answer that question for you. So again, once you have your filters set, so you've got a great set of comparisons, you can use these download options here: Chamber Operations Report, the Trends Report, and the Key Performance Report card. I have a couple of examples up. I know we're going to run out of time. I'm just going to pop in and show you the Key Performance Indicators report card. As Kathy was mentioning, this is our newest report download from Dynamic Chamber Benchmarking. And it is a one-page, really quick, at-a-glance, super overview. And we developed this with another chamber and had quite a bit of feedback, including Kathy's feedback on which elements were these key performance indicators. So we're really pleased to offer this, and it's very easy to download, again, once you have participated in the surveys, the previous year surveys. I also want to show you really briefly the trends report because Kathy mentioned that several times. So this is, I already downloaded these, the operations trend report. This is the one that's looking at 2012 through 2015, and as soon as 2016 data will be released, that will include that year here as well. So this is a shorter slide deck, again, with key performances, so you can really use this to evaluate, again, do some analysis, deeper dive analysis at your own chamber. Let's see here. So we're available, HERO team is available to answer your questions specifically by our chat, but we're also available to meet with you by phone or web meeting, and so we're definitely available to do that. I'm going to pop back into my slide. So we like to say, feel the power. If you have the data, data leads to knowledge, and knowledge is empowering. So now you can decide what to do. And you heard Cathy's awesome call to action, which is we really want to hear how you're using this data. So we'll be at convention. You can always email the HERO team. And if you need more benchmarking ideas, we definitely have them. So we have a Chamberpedia page on benchmarking operations. We have several benchmarking examples in the samples library. We have dashboard report examples as well. And coming this spring, we'll be doing a webinar on dashboard reporting. So stay tuned for that. We also have the popular Measuring Your Success handout from the 2016 convention session, and that also has really great ideas about how to use benchmarking, and very similar to what Cathi was talking about. And then we definitely welcome your examples as well to the HERO resources. So you can just email that to HERO, H-E-R-O, at acce.org. Again, here's our slide about help. If there are questions, feel free to type those in, and if you need to sign off, please feel free to do that. Again, this session webinar has been recorded. It will be placed on the HERO webinars page, and if you have questions about accessing that, you can definitely email HERO. And then just a quick mention about Chamber of the Year Interest webinar. If you're interested in applying for this award, it does have a dynamic chamber benchmarking survey requirement, and so join in tomorrow, the 19th, from 3:30 to 4 p.m. Eastern, and you can register for that. Also, just want to make a quick special mention to save the date for ACCE Sales Training Conference. I will be there. Cathi, are you going to be there?
No, I won't be there at that one.
Okay.
But I will be at
Okay.
ACCE in Nashville.
Okay, super. We'll be talking more about using the membership statistics and reports available at that sales training conference, and I'll be also available to answer your questions individually at a session on Thursday from, I think it's 4 o'clock, 3 or 4 o'clock. Before we just adjourn into questions, I want to say thank you. Thank you to Cathi so very much. Thank you, ACCE members, for joining us today. And I'm going to switch over to the question panel. Again, if you need to sign off, feel free to do so. I'm not seeing any questions here.
That's because they're all busy entering data.
We hope so. We hope so. And again, if you have questions afterwards, you can email HERO. If you have questions for Cathi, email HERO, and we're happy to forward that on to Cathi. Or Cathi, can you share your best email as well?
You know, I guess if they want to reach me here at the Austin Chamber, they can do that, and it's Hight, H-I-G-H-T, at austinchamber.com.
Wonderful. Okay, thank you so much, everybody. I'm just going to hang on the line for another minute and see if any questions pop up. And if not, we wish you a great day. Thanks, everybody, for attending.
All right. Thanks, Sarah.
Thank you, Cathi. Looks like no questions, so we'll go ahead and close out this webinar and just again say thank you to everybody. Have a great day.
All right. Bye-bye.
Thanks.